Good morning to one and all. In my previous two online classes, I made revision on case study Bhopal gas tragedy and case study Challenges Space Shuttle respectively. In today's class, I am going to do a revision on case study Chernobyl disaster. Okay, as you all know, I already discussed Chernobyl disaster in detail in class itself, isn't it? Case study questions might be asked in part C or sometimes in part B. Regarding case study questions, I already explained more details in my previous two classes. You can see in this slide. This slide already we explained a number of times in my previous classes. So I just moving to next content. Generally, depending on the questions, you may have to explain the disaster. Say, for example, here, Chernobyl disaster. So depending on the question, you may have to explain, narrate the Chernobyl disaster, what happened, what are the chronological events took place. There's one you have to explain. Sometimes depends on the question. You may have to discuss violation of moral, ethical, and professional code of standards in the disaster. Sometimes you have to discuss the human error, failures, flaws, all you can explain. You can discuss and explain here. Sometimes the question may ask you to explain. Also, you may have to write conclusion to avoid such disaster in future, or what are the safety lessons one can learn from the disaster. This type of the content may be asked in the question. Depends on the question, you have to give your answer in the case study question. Okay, I'm moving to next slide. Chernobyl disaster. Background. The Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on Saturday, 26 April 1986 at the number 4 reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat in the north of the Ukrainian SSR. So reactor, the acronym in the Russian language, it is RBMK. It can be translated roughly means reactor of high power of the channel type. So reactor is cooled by water and moderated by graphite. So this is the background, the introduction to the Chernobyl disaster. So the disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on 26 April 1986 at the number 4 reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. At that time it is Soviet Union. Okay. Now you can see RBMK reactor. So this is the, um, the reactor diagram. You can have some idea. We already discussed this all in detail in the class. You already have the course material, this case study material in your hand. So please go through it. So since this is a revision class, so I'm just moving faster. So reactor plant scenario. As the reaction occurs, the uranium fuel becomes hot. The water pumped through the core in pressure tubes removes the heat from the fuel. The water is then boiled into steam. The steam turns the turbines. The water is then cooled. Then the process repeats. So this is the general functioning of the reactor plant. So you can give some idea when a question comes. If you may have to explain the nuclear power plant, then disaster, so you may add these points. Okay. So this is the fuel assemblies. You can see there are fuel rod. So you can see the fuel assemblies from this slide. Okay, this is day of disaster. April 25th, 1986. So mostly the sequence of the event started. Then April 26th, 1986, it is continuing. So a lot of sequential events. So maybe the problem, error, the misfortunes all happen during this uh, period. You can find from this slide 1:23:48. That's the time, the early morning. April 26, 1986, first thermal explosion occurred. Then continuously 1:23:55, second explosion occurred. So we can just go through this slide. Okay, now. So due to this disaster, what are the casualties? So direct casualties and indirect casualties. As far as the direct casualties are concerned, 5.5 million people still live in contaminated areas. 31 people died in 3 months of radiation poisoning. 134 emergency workers suffered from acute radiation sickness. 25,000 rescue workers died since then of diseases caused by radiation. Cancer afflicts many others. Increased birth defects, miscarriages, and stillbirths. The direct casualties. So, at the same time, the people may have the indirect casualties. There may be indirect casualties. What are the indirect casualties? By the year 2000, there were 1,800 cases of thyroid cancer in children and adolescents. You might notice that by the year 2000, there were 1,800 cases of thyroid cancer in children and adolescents. Also, high number of suicide and violent death among firemen, policemen, and other recovery workers. So this is mental problem. So direct casualties, at the same time, the indirect casualties. So from another point, environmental impact. So you can see that areas still impacted today: soil, groundwater, air, food, crops, livestock, all affected because of this radiation. So from this casualties and data, you know the intensity of the disaster. Okay. Now I'm moving to next slide. Human errors, violation. Okay. Human error and violation. Okay, here. So this one you can consider as a violation of moral, ethical, and professional code of standard in the disaster or human error. So under this heading, we are discussing a test on the turbine generator was planned to be conducted during a scheduled plant shutdown maintenance. To conduct the test, the power plant output was reduced to 700 megawatts. But due to a sudden and unexpected demand, the power output has to be raised. Okay, number one, to go ahead with the test, the reactor operators had already disconnected the emergency core cooling system, ignoring the rise in demand situation. Two, further, a control device was not properly reprogrammed to maintain power at 700 to 100 megawatts level. Three, the test was conducted at 200 megawatts power output, which is very low for the test. They should have shut down the reactor. Four, the operators blocked all emergency signals and automatic shutdown control. Thus, all safety systems were disconnected. So I'm moving to next slide, the same topic. Five, the operators raised rods to increase power output and tried to continue the test. This made the reactor unsafe. The temperature of RBMK reactor increased and the fission rate increased. Six, the test should have been postponed but continued. The reactor core melted and due to the hydrogen accumulation, the reactor caught fire and the radioactivity waste began to spread out in USSR and also Europe. So you can, from all these points, you might have noticed there are, there are more human errors, the operator errors. So due to the, mostly or mainly due to the human errors only this disaster occurred. Furthermore, connection of the four main cooling pumps to the right and left of the system, that is one of the reasons for failure. Then mental model, the operator did not have a good mental model of the system itself. That is the most unfortunate thing. Then overconfidence. By having an electrical engineer on site for an electrical test, only one electrical engineer was there. Also, no confirmation of cues obtained from the system. So, overconfidence also led to the disaster. Beta too high. Many missed signals before the accident. There were many missed signals before the accident. So, these all the observed errors, flaws, violations that led to the disaster. Okay. So now I'm moving to next slide. System analysis. This also violation under the same category only. You can see the previous slide under the heading human errors and violation. Here also you can say violation. Maybe it is mostly violation of the professional code of standards or technical flaw. See, use of graphite as a moderator. That is one of the technical reason. Lack of a well-built containment structure. Then inadequate instrumentation and alarms for an emergency situation. Then the fourth point, there were no physical controls that prevented the operators from operating the reactor in its unstable state. This is all also reasons for the uh, occurrence of the nuclear disaster. So we can give the answer in the from this view. That is, we have to discuss about the moral, ethical, and the technical, professional uh, code of standards in the disaster. So please take note. Okay. Then I'm moving to next slide. Safety lessons from the Chernobyl disaster. Okay. The disaster occurred. Okay. From this disaster, what lessons, what safety lessons one can learn? Maybe this one is a considered as a conclusion. So we are writing the conclusion to avoid such disaster in future also. Okay, number one, the thickness of containment should be more to withstand the possible explosion and further damage due to the radiation leakage over the surroundings. Next point, or the test should have been abandoned and all controls switched on. Then the output should have been increased. The next point, the decision making on test and increase the load should have been with one person, or the decision maker should have coordinated with each other. The next lesson, periodical mock drill of emergency for the operators, so this safe exit should have been arranged. Then the last point here we listed out, instead Instead, radioactivity monitoring instrument indicated a rise earlier. The operator should have informed the superior at once. People residing in the neighborhood ought to have been informed and steps initiated to evacuate the public immediately. So these are some observations. Okay. So these are the safety lessons from the Chernobyl disaster. Okay. Again, before ending this online class, I'd like to reiterate that depending on the question, the case study question, you have to write your answer. Sometimes you may have to ask to explain the disaster. Sometimes you may have to sometimes uh, you may have to ask to discuss the violation of moral, ethical, professional and technical code of standard in the disaster. You have to list out the flaw, failure, problem, everything you can write down. Also, you may have to ask to write a conclusion to avoid such disaster in future. Or sometimes you have to ask to write something about what are the safety lessons one can learn from this disaster. It depends on the question. So you have to apply whatever you learn in the professional ethics and engineering subject in all the 5 units. You learn a lot of terms, technical term and philosophical term, also concepts, everything appropriately you have to apply here. Then you improvise the answer. So this video, I'm giving the case study in one aspect, from my point of view. We can improvise the case study to greater extent. So whatever you learn, you write here, you apply and make it a nice one. Okay, go through my book and my materials, study properly. Whatever question comes in the case study, write nicely and accordingly. Prepare properly. All the best.